A faithful dog was left at a lonely petrol station, shivering in bewilderment, seeing cars go past quickly. But what transpired following this tragic incident inspired. The sun was sinking behind a stretch of land when a series of events that no one could have predicted occurred and irrevocably altered lives. A small convenience shop was in the middle of nothing, with an empty highway casting long shadows over a distant petrol station. As the evening air grew cooler, the neon sign next to the fuel pumps barely survived. A lone golden retriever, his golden fur matted with filth, sat near the edge of the station among the shadows. He sat there, his gaze locked on the horizon, without moving or barking. Waiting was Taylor, a cherished family dog who had been abandoned by his owner. A man had entered the gas station earlier that afternoon in a black SUV. Distracted and irritated, he had gone outside, filled up the tank, then entered to retrieve. Snacks Taylor was anxious to stretch his legs after jumping out of the automobile. But when the man returned, the SUV rushed off, and he either didn't notice or didn't care that Taylor wasn't back in the car. Mark, the gas station attendant, saw the puppy sitting next to the pump long after the SUV had passed, leaving Taylor bewildered and alone. Had left, his brows furrowed in worry as he left holding a bag of chips. He said, "Hey buddy," bending down, and Taylor perked up, waving his tail slightly, but his eyes continued going back. Mark was uncertain of what to do and went to the road as though anticipating his owner's return. Taylor stayed at the petrol station until nightfall, periodically darting toward oncoming automobiles with his ears perked up. The sight of the automobiles ignoring him and retreating at the sound of an engine was heartbreaking. However, Mark found it particularly challenging since he kept thinking about how devoted the dog appeared to be while it waited for someone. Word started to circulate among the few patrons who passed by some leftover food crumbs that they might never return. Others shook their heads in shock at the brutality of Taylor's circumstances. Yet individuals are so reckless that, unbeknownst to everyone, the old woman whispered as she gave Mark a piece of bread for the dog at Taylor's. Abandonment was the start of a remarkable journey. What began as a devastating scene of loss will shortly result in moments of extraordinary fortitude, kindness, and a conclusion that nobody could have imagined Mark would experience. As night fell, the golden retriever was curled up beside the station's entrance, shivering, and he couldn't stop thinking about Taylor. Even though Mark loves dogs, he knew he couldn't bring Taylor home because his landlord had a severe no-pets rule. But it felt just as terrible to leave the dog outside while it waited for a potential owner who might never come back. Mark returned outside with an old blanket he had discovered in this storage closet around midnight after his shift ended. "You go, friend," he whispered, covering Taylor with the blanket. The dog waggled his tail gently, but remained in his. "You deserve more than this." By daybreak, Taylor was squatting next to him, scratching behind his ears. Still there, sitting watchfully at the pump, while the regulars at the gas station kept hearing about his abandonment. Station, a trucker left half of a sandwich for him, and a young couple came by to offer him water, despite the generosity of. Taylor's eyes never left the road, and he had faith in his owners. Returned steadfastly, 3 days later, Mark started to observe a shift in Taylor's. Mark felt a sense of urgency when he saw that his once optimistic glance had faded and his vitality had diminished. If no one came to assert that the dog might suffer a negative outcome and be resolved to act, Mark, willing to act, shared a photo of Taylor on social media, along with a brief note that was left at the petrol station. "This devoted dog has. He needs a home and has been waiting for days." The post immediately went viral, receiving dozens of as shares and comments poured in. People made solutions, and some expressed their displeasure at the state of affairs. Offered to adopt Taylor, but nobody has come forward to claim him as their own. After seeing Mark's post, a middle-aged woman called Lisa showed up at the petrol station on the 5th day and introduced herself. "We can take him in as volunteers at a local animal shelter," she said. He obviously needed medical care and a secure place to stay. But Mark was hesitant since he wanted Taylor to be loved, but he couldn't get rid of the thought that the dog's tale wasn't complete. What if his owner returns? He questioned Lisa. Scowled as someone truly cared for him. They would have come here by now, grudgingly, but 5 days is a long time for a dog to wait. Together, Mark and Lisa convinced Taylor to climb inside Lisa's golden retriever. although hesitant at first. Taking one more look at the petrol station before getting in, Mark experienced a pang of guilt as, though he convinced himself it was best at the rescue center, the automobile drove off. After a thorough examination, Taylor's veterinarian reported that although he was generally healthy, he displayed slight. The center's personnel tried their best to make Taylor comfortable despite his stress and malnourishment, but he remained. He was reclusive, ate little, and mostly lay by the window, gazing out as though he was still waiting for. Mark, meanwhile, couldn't help but think about Taylor whenever he saw. He started looking at Lisa's Taylor daily updates after feeling a profound sense of loss at the vacant space next to the pump. Fortunately, a breakthrough happened 2 weeks after Taylor arrived at the shelter. Lisa called Mark within. "You won't believe it, but Taylor saved another dog today." Mark was in a state of shock. "What do you think?" Lisa explained that the staff had taken a stray puppy into the center, and it was shaking and scared. The puppy in the same room as Taylor in the hopes that the more composed manner of the older dog would help settle the newcomer too. To everyone's amazement, Taylor assumed a protective role right away, lying down and gently urging the puppy toward the food bowl. Taylor's behavior changed so dramatically that he looked to come alive while being held next to him to keep him warm. Mark smiled when Lisa emailed him a video of the exchange once more. It seemed as though he had discovered a new purpose. Lisa suggested that Taylor would benefit by lending a hand to others, and over time, Taylor was introduced to other canines in need by the rescue center staff, became the shelter's therapy dog, assisting frightened or traumatized animals in acclimating to their new environment. Even the local media took notice of Taylor's story, featuring a brief news broadcast that highlighted his work at the shelter. Despite the newfound joy, the headline said, "An abandoned dog becomes a hero for strays." Taylor informed us that Mark still felt a feeling of obligation after going to the rescue point one time. The golden retriever wanted to see Taylor for himself, and when he saw him, his tail waggled. Mark knelt down to let Taylor to lick his face as he hurried to greet him. Mark exclaimed, "You remember me?" as a wave of emotions swept over him. Taylor screamed softly in an emotionally charged voice, perhaps asking, "How could I forget, eh?" A week following Mark's visit to the shelter, Lisa got a surprise call from a man. After a week, Jeremy, who claimed to be Taylor's original owner, identified himself and said he had witnessed Taylor's story. "That's my dog," he declared firmly on the local news. "His name isn't Taylor, it's Friend." Lisa was instantly dubious about whether this was your dog and why you left him at a gas station. "But I need to get him back." "Station?" she questioned Jeremy, who paused before launching into an explanation, saying that while traveling cross-country with a friend, his car broke down at the gas station, leaving him without any money for. Jeremy requested that I return for him after he had been forced to catch a ride to the closest town for repairs, but problems became more difficult and took longer than I anticipated. Lisa stayed careful. "Do you possess any evidence that he is your dog?" Jeremy recited facts regarding Buddy's look and behavior with ease. Favorite treat: a scar from a past injury on his hind leg, and his fondness of chasing tennis balls. Lisa granted him access to the shelter since he was a perfect fit for Taylor, but she made it plain that she would put Taylor's health above everything else. And when Jeremy showed up at the shelter the following day, his behavior sparked suspicions that he was unkempt, irritated, and uninterested in talking about Taylor's requirements as soon as he spotted the dog. He called out a friend, and Taylor's response was, at best, ambivalent. The golden retriever slowly made his way toward Jeremy, his tail waving slightly, but not with the same zeal as Mark or Lisa. Lisa paid close attention to the exchange and observed that Jeremy didn't appear overly thrilled to see you. Despite her misgivings, she shrugged and said, "I think you're just confused because it's been a while." Lisa gave Jeremy permission to spend time with Taylor while keeping an eye on them, and Jeremy tried to persuade the dog with instructions, but Taylor didn't react. Thus it became evident that when Taylor may have formerly belonged to Jeremy, but their relationship had been seriously damaged or destroyed. Mark, who'd been notified Lisa about the situation when she unexpectedly arrived at the shelter, saying, "I had to see this for myself." When Taylor saw Mark, his whole attitude changed, and the dog's tail barked with excitement. Mark bent down, and Taylor kissed his face passionately as he raced toward him, wagging angrily. "It appears like he's—" Mark replied, half joking, "I've made up my mind." Jeremy scowled. "He's my dog. I have the—" "You left Taylor alone, Jeremy." Lisa came in with a stern tone to take him. Whether deliberate or not, spending days at a gas station constituted negligence. And based on my observations, Taylor is far. Jeremy's irritation bubbled over. "Because you can't just keep him from being happier and healthier here than he appears to be with you." Mark, his owner, noticed the tension and spoke out. "Perhaps it has nothing to do with ownership. Perhaps the best interests of Taylor Lisa are at stake," as she nodded legally. "Before making any choices, we must confirm custody. In the interim, Taylor remains." Here, Jeremy barged out while muttering to himself. But Lisa wasn't persuaded that the issue was resolved. "But we should exercise caution," she cautioned Mark, who might return later. Despite everything he felt that night, Mark couldn't get rid of the idea that Taylor would be taken away. Unable to sleep due to a strong attachment created by trust and affection for the dog. After Jeremy left, he made the decision to act, and Lisa took additional safety measures at. She asked her staff to closely monitor Taylor while he was there and improve the shelter's security system. When Jeremy returned, she informed them, "I want to be ready," but Mark was unable to move. The following morning, his concern for Taylor stemmed from his intuition that she deserved better, even if he knew Jeremy had some claim to the dog. Chose to return to the shelter, and upon arriving the following morning, he discovered Taylor contentedly chasing. Mark remarked, "He looks like he's settling in well," when one of the volunteers threw him a bore. "No, he is, but that doesn't mean Jeremy won't make an effort to get him back. I've been researching legal counsel to see." Mark scowled. "What are our options?" Lisa paused. "Do you think he has a chance?" "Legally, he could demonstrate ownership, but the judge will also take into account what's best for. If Taylor's actions with Jeremy yesterday were any guide, he would be better off remaining here or with you." He was surprised to learn that Mark would adopt Taylor. He had been close to the dog, but adopting him felt like a huge. Mark said, "Step, do you think I'd be a good fit for him?" Lisa grinned, and Taylor lights. Mark left the shelter deep, saying, "I think you'd be a great match if you're willing to commit." Although Taylor had unexpectedly made his life happier, getting a puppy wasn't a choice to. Taking it easy, he spent the remainder of the day learning about the requirements for giving a dog like. By evening, Taylor was on the verge of saying yes, and the following day, Jeremy arrived. This time, he arrived at the shelter without warning and brought a frayed folder with pictures of him and Taylor, who were then known as companion, as well as his adoption documents and veterinary paperwork, which attest to his identity as my dog. After Jeremy slapped the folder onto Lisa's desk, Lisa went over the papers. Though they acknowledged that Jeremy had previously possessed Taylor, they withheld the entire tale, which may indicate. Looking Jeremy in the eye, she replied, "You adopted him, but that doesn't explain why you left him at a gas station." Jeremy's annoyance increased when I explained that neglect is something we take seriously. "It wasn't deliberate. I had no other option. Lisa wasn't sure if you had cared about Taylor, you would have returned for him right away." As the dispute went on, Mark came into the. When he noticed Jeremy and Lisa engage in a violent argument, he abruptly stopped and inquired, "What's going on?" Mark maintained his composure as Jeremy turned to him and pointed angrily. "Who are you to this dog? You're not his owner. However, I've been spending time with him, and I'm concerned about his welfare." Lisa stepped in, and Mark has been supporting us. "Unlike you, Taylor has consistently had a darker Jeremic expression. This isn't finished. If I need to go to court, I will do so that night." Mark and Lisa talk about the circumstances. Lisa talked about the matter and clarified that although Jeremy had provided evidence of ownership, Taylor's, she acknowledged that any court decision would heavily weigh his conduct and well-being before siding with him. "However, we can also provide proof that Taylor is better off without him." Mark paused before. In response, would the case against Jeremy Lisa be strengthened if I formally applied to adopt Taylor? If the court determines that Taylor has a prospective adoptive who is prepared to give her a secure and caring home, it might. Could sway their choice. Mark nodded. "Therefore, I'll fulfill Taylor's demand." Mark filled out the adoption paperwork that Lisa gave him because, It was preferable to being forced back into a precarious situation. He felt a sense of resolve when he signed his name at the bottom right away. He wasn't just doing this. In the days that followed, the shelter was ready for the potential of a legal action, but he was doing it for Taylor for himself. Lisa got in touch with a lawyer who focused on animal welfare disputes. Obtaining proof that Taylor's health had improved since coming to the shelter, Mark gave a thorough description of his exchanges with Taylor that highlight their developing relationship, while Jeremy's. He became more and more unpredictable in his behavior, leaving irate voicemails at the shelter and even showing up late one night to bang on. Jeremy was removed off the property when Lisa phoned the police and demanded to see Taylor. Lisa informed the officer that we are treating this issue seriously in spite of the tension. Taylor continued to flourish in the shelter while blissfully oblivious to the strife going on around him, enthusiastically welcoming Mark on his daily visits. And each time Mark saw him, his determination to defend Taylor strengthened. Stronger, Lisa was notified by Jeremy's attorney a week later that he planned to seek custody of Taylor. A court date was scheduled, and the shelter prepared for the impending conflict. Lisa informed Mark, "I think we have a good case, but it's going to be an uphill fight." Mark replied, "No matter what, As the court date approached, Mark found himself thinking back on his developing bond with Taylor at every court appearance. Their relationship grew stronger as a result of the refuge, and it became more obvious that Taylor considered him more than a mere guest, was consoling and trustworthy. But there was an unmistakable tension underneath this relationship because of Jeremy's aggressive conduct and the unpredictability of the court case. One morning, Mark came to the shelter to walk Taylor as Taylor ran toward him as he approached the playground, eyes sparkling and tail wagging. "Hey buddy Mark," he replied, getting down on his knees to scratch the dog behind his ears in preparation for "Mark, may we have a conversation?" Adventure Lisa came over with a serious look. He was aware of the serious tone before you left, so he knew what was going on. Mark receives a manila packet from Lisa. "I hired a private investigator to look into Jeremy after Lisa gave him a manila folder. I wanted to be ready for court, and I believe this is something you should see, Mark." His gut turned when he opened the folder and quickly perused the materials inside. He read about past. Jeremy has been the target of complaints for failing to care for his dogs, outstanding fines for doing so, and even an eviction threat. This is worse than I anticipated, coming from a place where neighbors had claimed to have heard pets barking in distress. Although the system isn't flawless, Mark said in a hushed voice how someone like him is even permitted to keep animals. "Lisa, this strengthens our argument since it demonstrates a pattern of behavior that supports the claim that Taylor would be better off elsewhere." Although the situation was weighing heavily on Mark, he nodded. "What should we do next?" Lisa clarified that they would provide the proof in court along with Taylor's better shelter situation, but we must be watchful. She also mentioned that Jeremy could not be pleased with this information. That night, Mark got an unexpected call from an unknown number. "Hi Mark, this is Jeremy." His response made me uneasy right away, since it was almost too calm. "Want to chat, but there's nothing to discuss," Mark stated in a strong tone. Jeremy laughed darkly. "You think you know what's best, but I'm not backing down because Taylor's well-being is what matters. You have no idea how much I know about my dog, but I can see that he's happier and healthier without you." After Mark shot back, there was a little pause before Jeremy resumed his. "You're mistaken," voice colder. "Mark Taylor is mine, and I'll stop at nothing to win him back before Mark could reply." But Jeremy ended the call, leaving Mark uneasy, but also weakening his resolve to keep. The following day, Mark Taylor went back to someone who had repeatedly shown that he was unable to give a secure and caring environment. Discussed the call with Lisa, who reported it to their lawyer right away. This demonstrates Jeremy's state of. Lisa mentioned that it's critical that we record all of Mark's agreements and started documenting his conversations with Jeremy and his visits to Taylor in detail at the shelter. Kept collecting testimonies from staff members and volunteers who had seen Taylor's change. One volunteer at a time. "Dr. Carter is willing to testify." Dr. Carter, a retired veterinarian, volunteered to testify, saying, "I've seen too many." As the days went by, Dr. Carter stated that Taylor deserved better in situations like this. Encountered difficulties in his personal life as well. After observing his preoccupied behavior at work, his manager summoned him into his office. "Mark, are things going well? You've been busy lately, Mark." To his astonishment, his employer understood before he explained the problem to Taylor. "I have a dog too," he added. "I understand, but please make sure it doesn't conflict with your duties to balance his job." And the court case was draining, but Mark was committed to finishing it, so he started spending his evenings reviewing each piece of evidence and rehearsing his testimony in front of the lawyer and coach him on how to make his point, stressing the value of maintaining composure under pressure. One evening, as Mark went over his notes, he saw that an unknown number had texted him, saying, "You're wasting your time. Taylor will be mine once more shortly after." Mark experienced a wave of rage, but forced himself to remain composed. "Jeremy is attempting to rattle you by forwarding the note to Lisa and their lawyer, who urged him not to reply." Mark refused to be harassed, but the lawyer advised against it. He was intimidated because he realized that he was battling for all animals that had ever been neglected, not just Taylor. Although deserted, he wasn't going to back down to the shelter Taylor since the stakes were bigger than he had first thought. As he flourished, he gained popularity among the volunteers and staff, who frequently complimented him on his kind disposition. The desire to satisfy Mark came every day, and their relationship became closer. One afternoon, while they were playing fetch in the yard, Mark gazed into Taylor's eyes and noticed a trust that had not previously existed. It was a nonverbal pledge that Mark would always keep him safe. As the court date drew near, Mark and Lisa got some unexpectedly positive news. A woman called Angela had lived in the same apartment building as Jeremy before coming out with a statement about what she saw. First-hand knowledge of Jeremy's negligence, and even supplied images of Taylor appearing undernourished at the time, which could be the tipping point, Lisa stated, presenting Mark with the pictures as concrete proof of. Because of what Taylor went through, Mark experienced hope for the first time since the conflict started, believing that they might. In reality, the courtroom was smaller than Mark had anticipated, but there was a lot of tension in the air. Jeremy sat on one side, his face scowling and his posture stubborn. Mark sat beside Lisa and their lawyer, who silently went over the evidence stack they had prepared for Taylor. Was not permitted in the courtroom, but his presence was felt strongly because the proceedings depended on this moment. Started by depicting Jeremy's lawyer as a misguided dog owner who had fallen on hard times, which my client likes. Mark provides testimony. Taylor, the attorney, made it clear that the claimed neglect was caused by financial difficulties rather than a lack of concern. Mark, restraining himself from interrupting Lisa, clenched his hands beneath the table and leaned over, whispering, "Remain composed. We'll get our opportunity." When Mark's turn to testify came, he stepped to the judge after taking his oath, and their lawyer led him through a series of inquiries intended to emphasize his conversations with Taylor and the proof of Jeffrey's negligence. "Mr. Anderson, could you explain Taylor's state when you first saw him at the gas station?" the lawyer said. Mark inhaled deeply. He was thin, dehydrated, and obviously upset. He was obviously neglected for a long time because his ribs were visible and he had sores on his paw from walking on hot pavement. When the lawyer presented a picture to the jurors and judge, it depicted Taylor as Mark, with slender, terrified people surrounding him. As Jeremy's employer tried to discredit him, a tired mutter swept the room as the picture was circulated. According to Mark's evidence, he exaggerated how bad Taylor's condition was. "You're not a veterinarian, are you?" "You don't, Mr. Anderson, but I've volunteered at animal shelters for years," so Mark answered calmly. "I understand what. A healthy dog appears to be in good health, but Taylor was anything but." The lawyer's cross-examination went on, but Mark maintained his position. The judge was impressed by his composed manner and thorough responses, and he nodded. Dr. Carter then spoke intelligently as Lisa and the shelter personnel gave their testimonies. Taylor's illness was expertly analyzed by the retired veterinarian in my. According to her professional assessment, Taylor was ignored for a long time, yet the evidence indicates that he wasn't. Jeremy moved uneasily in his chair, but kept his stubborn attitude despite not getting enough food, water, or medical attention. However, he maintained that he loved Taylor, and that leaving was just a mistake when it came his turn to testify. "I was heading back for him when he told me at the gas station that I simply needed some time to gather my thoughts. Sounded hollow, particularly once the court showed the proof of his previous neglect that Angela, his former neighbor, had taken the stage and recounted her personal experience of witnessing Taylor abandoned outside in severe weather with little to no. She replied, her voice shaking, "It broke my heart to see him like that, shelter." Throughout the trial, Mark couldn't help but notice Jeremy's sporadic looks, and he felt that no dog should be handled that way. The decision, instead of the hostile glares he had anticipated, he received something more disturbing, a mixture of shame and bitterness, as though Jeremy saw that Mark truly had feelings for Taylor, but was unable to acknowledge his own shortcomings. The trial's emotional toll affected all parties during a break. Went outdoors to get some fresh air and discovered that he was staring at the courtroom steps, reliving the past. He wondered for a few weeks if there was anything more he could have done to avoid this circumstance. Was he doing enough? Lisa joined him in handing. She said in a comforting tone, "Give him a bottle of water. You're doing great. Second guess yourself." Mark nodded but said nothing since he understood that the stakes were enormous for both Taylor and As the trial came to a finish, both parties presented the case's larger message of animal welfare. In their concluding remarks, Jeremy's attorney asked for mercy, highlighting his client's desire to alter Mark's lawyer. But he was more concerned with Taylor's needs than with punishing Mr. "It's about making sure Taylor has the safe, loving home he deserves," Thompson said, pointing to Jeremy. Everyone was in a condition of anxious expectancy as the judge adjourned the court to consider. Mark then returned to He played with the dog in the shelter that night and spent time with Taylor, who welcomed him with his typical zeal. Mark had a strong sense of duty in the yard, regardless of what transpired. "I'll always fight for you," I muttered. The following morning, the judge delivered her decision, and the audience fell silent as she started. After examining the testimony and supporting documentation, it is evident that Taylor's tone was composed and authoritative. Suffering abuse while under Mr. Thompson's care, although the court accepts Mr. Thompson's allegations. Such financial difficulties does not justify his inability to supply the dog with the essentials for its welfare. Since Mark's heart was racing and he held his breath, custody of Taylor is awarded. A feeling of relief swept over Mr. Anderson, who has shown a dedication to the dog's well-being. Lisa squeezed Mark's shoulder as the words sank in, and he started crying. However, as they left the courthouse, reporters and Jeremy hurried out of the courtroom without saying anything. A fresh face. When people gathered to ask Mark for his thoughts, he only replied, "Taylor deserves a life full with love and care, and I'm." Taylor seemed to notice the change, and it was an honor to provide that to him at the shelter. The dog sprang into Mark's arms and began to wag his tail wildly when he came to take him home, marking the beginning of a new. The weeks that followed the court's decision offered Mark and Taylor newfound happiness, although, beneath their joy, a faint tightness started to develop in Jeremy's. Mark couldn't get rid of the unsettling sense that the man's exit from the courtroom wasn't the end of the story. Wouldn't let go of Taylor so quickly. The dog's life with Taylor prospered, adapted well to Mark's house, his protective manner changing to a fun and affectionate disposition. During their walks, neighbors frequently paused to admire the golden retriever, remarking on how content and healthy he seemed. Mark and Taylor were playing fetch in the garden one lovely afternoon when Lisa showed up out of the blue. In sharp contrast to her often upbeat manner, her look was solemn. "We need to discuss," Mark remarked in a quiet voice. "I just hung up with DR. Carter's been getting odd calls concerning Taylor, with someone asking where he's staying." Mark frowned. Did she mention who it was? No, but she did add that the individual didn't sound nice, so she assumed it was Jeremy. Mark's hold on Taylor's leash tightened. If he believes he will reclaim her, he will be greatly mistaken later. That Taylor growled from the living room while Mark was making dinner that evening. The dog was standing by the window, his fur. Mark looked through the curtains, bristling and staring at something outside, but he saw nothing out of the ordinary. Still feeling uneasy, he made the decision to add more security cameras to the house because it's better to be safe than sorry. The following days went by without any problems, but the strain was evident, so he murmured and patted Taylor's head. Mark started to observe a car parked too long across the street, footsteps in the ground close to his rear gate, and other little, frightening details. Neighborhood and Taylor's increased vigilance while out on a stroll one evening. Just as Mark was falling asleep, his phone chimed with a security app message that the backyard heart's motion detector had detected activity. He opened the live feed while he was banging and noticed someone standing close to the gate, trying to unlatch it without my supervision. With Taylor by his side, Mark murmured, picked up a flashlight, and went outside, directing the beam of light toward A man was caught in mid-action by a gate. The figure froze and then ran into the darkness, causing Mark's stomach to turn. Mark acknowledged the departing figure of Jeremy Taylor, who strained against the leash and barked angrily. He phoned the police, who came quickly and took a report while they were there, in a stern but slightly trembling voice. They promised Mark that they would patrol the area more regularly because they couldn't arrest Jeremy without proof of intent. Lisa returned the following day, and I don't believe her concern was visible to Mark. I refused to let him leave. Jeremy is about to go because he is desperate, and desperate people act recklessly. Mark agreed. I'll do that. They discussed strategies to keep Taylor safe, saying, I won't allow him to return to a life of neglect. Lisa recommended a tracking collar to increase Taylor's security, since it would enable Mark to keep an eye on her whereabouts. Additionally, they made arrangements for a few reliable friends to assist in keeping watch so that Taylor was never left alone. Despite the safety measures, Mark couldn't get rid of the suspicion that Jeremy was plotting something, and his worries were verified that one wet evening. He came home from a late meeting to discover his rear door jarred. Panic sprang out. Mark, the dog's bar, came from the living room through him as he yelled for Taylor. And then there was a struggle. Mark hurried inside and discovered Jeremy trying to pull Taylor out the door. The dog retaliated by growling, and Mark yelled when Jeremy snapped, but Jeremy held on to his collar tightly. Taking a broom, the dog charged at Jeremy, startling him. Jeremy let go of Taylor and staggered back. Mark swiftly dragged Taylor back as he lunged at Jeremy, knocking him to the ground, and called the police as Jeremy quickly got up and ran away, and the police showed in a little while after to collect evidence and take statements. Discovered a crowbar close to the rear entrance, suggesting that Jeremy had broken in. This is significant, an officer said. Mark nodded, his heart still pounding, and he glanced down at the scene as Mark Weck issued a restraining order and increased patrols. You saved the day, buddy, murmured Taylor, who had taken up residence at his feet, his protective instincts still on high alert. Grateful, the event strengthened Mark's resolve to keep Taylor safe at all costs. Strengthened the home's security measures, such as adding floodlights to the garden and installing stronger locks. In the meantime, Lisa set up a neighborhood watch to keep everyone alert for any strange activities. As the case garnered notoriety, Mark charged Jeremy with additional offenses, including attempted theft and breaking and entering, highlighting animal abuse and the extent people would go to in order to keep their pets safe in the local media. As the days went by, the neighborhood came together to support Mark and Taylor. Neighbors brought goods and provided words of support. They told tales of their own cherished pets. The neighborhood shelter even held a fundraising event to promote animal welfare. For the first time since the tragedy started, Mark sensed a glimmer of optimism by drawing inspiration from Taylor's story. Seemed to sense the change as his lively energy returned and his tail began to wag more frequently. Together, they have faced a difficult challenge and came out stronger. The days after the attempted break-in produced an unexpected surge of. With the help of Mark's community, Taylor's story became a testament to tenacity. Published in neighborhood newsletters and social media communities, the heightened awareness resulted in unforeseen relationships, such as, I read about Sarah, a volunteer at a local animal rescue, visiting. Sarah said this when she dropped over with a bundle of toys and dog treats for Taylor. Is amazing, and your actions for him are motivational. We would love to have you tell a story at our next shelter. Mark paused, uncertain whether he wanted to relive the terrifying experience in front of others, but Sarah's. A pivotal moment. His excitement was infectious, and he ultimately consented after seeing that it would be a chance to push for improved. Meanwhile, Jeremy's actions continued to throw a shadow over animal welfare. Looming legal accusations and a restraining order appeared to temporarily discourage him. But Mark couldn't forget the appearance of It was evident from the distress on his face during the break-in that Jeremy's bond with Taylor went beyond. The dog represented something more profound, like remorse or guilt for his history. Disregard Lisa, who was always pragmatic, urged Mark to concentrate on creating a good future for Taylor instead of worrying about what Jeremy might do next. "You've already won, Mark," she added. Over coffee in the afternoon, "Taylor is safe, loved, and doing well. Don't let Jeremy's errors obscure the fact that Mark nodded, acknowledging her viewpoint, but the shelter event turned out to be a turning point. But he couldn't get rid of the persistent feeling that the story wasn't finished. It included kiosks from adoption campaigns and rescue organizations in a nearby park. Mark and Taylor were asked to give speeches during the main program regarding appropriate pet ownership education sessions. Their narrative presented as evidence of the transformational potential of love and compassion as Mark told the audience of Taylor's journey from being abandoned at a petrol station to being a cherished friend. Listened carefully as Taylor, whose golden fur was shining in the sunlight, sat at his feet. Mark concluded that Taylor had taught me something significant, as evidenced by his occasional tail wagging, as if recognizing the applause. His steady voice demonstrated to me how trust and resiliency can develop even when an animal is neglected. Deserves another chance, just as he caused the audience to cheer. And "You've inspired more people than you realize," Sarah said as she walked up to the podium to thank Mark for his remarks. A surprise apology. After the ceremony, Mark saw a familiar face and gave him a framed certificate of appreciation. Jeremy's disheveled visage hovered at the fringe of the crowd, avoiding direct eye contact but seemed determined to stay. Surprisingly, Taylor didn't snarl or bark. Instead, he gazed at Jeremy with. Mark slowly approached with a placid interest and a slightly wagging tail. "What are you doing here, Jeremy?" Jeremy moved uneasily. "And I've heard about the..." My initial reaction was to send him away, but I simply wanted to see Taylor. Mark. He paused at something in Jeremy's tone, but as you can see by Mark's neutral tone, he's doing fine. Jeremy nodded while keeping his gaze on Taylor. "I'm relieved to realize that I don't deserve him. I wanted to apologize for everything, even though I was a horrible owner back then." Mark was somewhat stunned by the sudden apology because he had anticipated defiance or justifications rather than regret. He eventually mentioned Taylor, who deserves the best life, in reference to me, Jeremy. And I'm trying to convey that to him. Jeremy nodded once again, his eyes welling with tears. "I get it, and I'm grateful for." Jeremy gave another nod. Mark, who was caring for him, saw Jeremy turn to go, feeling an odd mixture of relief and sympathy for everyone. Despite his shortcomings, Jeremy appeared to be a guy plagued by his past transgressions. But Mark was aware that Taylor's safety came first, and he wasn't prepared to take any chances. So his meeting with Jeremy served as a springboard for more in-depth thought. Mark discovered that his journey with Taylor had changed not just the dog's life, but also his own. Had changed from being a cautious, lonesome person to someone who loved community and connection. Lisa observed, "The shift as well. So you're different, Mark," she remarked one night while they were strolling Taylor together. "You're more open, more inclined to believe what Taylor taught me," which Mark acknowledged with a smile. I felt I owed it to him to take a chance on me. And as the weeks stretched into months, Taylor's narrative kept getting better. Mark received offers to speak at community centers and schools after inspiring the shelter event, where he shared teachings on empathy, accountability, and the close connection between people and animals. Jeremy, in the meantime, stayed away, and nothing more happened. Even though Mark occasionally saw him about town, it appeared the man had accepted his role as in. One cold autumn morning, Mark, an observer in Taylor's life, got a letter in. Jeremy sent him a letter in his mailbox, and it was honest and detailed. His battles with addiction and how, in his lowest moments, Taylor had been his only solace. Jeremy said that I believed I was protecting him by leaving him behind, but now I realize I was simply evading my responsibilities. Mark folded the letter and looked at it for a long time. Possibilities. Thank you for giving him the life I couldn't. Mark. Although it didn't excuse Jeremy for his previous deeds, it gave the narrative a human touch and served as a reminder that people under the correct conditions, animals could develop and change, and Mark and Taylor's friendship only became stronger over time. continued together and turned into animal welfare campaigners. Their tale is a beacon of hope for those dealing with comparable difficulties, having transformed from being left at a petrol station to being a favorite representation of tenacity. And Mark had changed you too. You were no longer a man burdened by caution, but someone who. It had been months since the shelter event, but he had welcomed the unanticipated delights that came with opening his heart. With Jeremy's heartfelt letter, Mark and Taylor had established a routine that felt calm but intentional, continuing to flourish, his coat gleaming and his manner assured. He had become into a. During their walks, neighbors and even complete strangers acknowledged this local hero. But one late afternoon, a startling disruption occurred as the sun sank low on the horizon, causing long shadows to spread around the area. While Taylor and Mark were playing frisbee in the backyard, Mark became aware of a figure at the far side of his property. The man paused beside the fence, and Mark's heart fell. Before Mark could speak, Taylor roused his tight and hesitant posture. His tail waggled as he went toward the barrier, his ears alert. Mark hesitantly returned his call, uncertain of Jeremy's motivations. "What are you doing here?" Mark inquired. Maintaining a composed yet forceful tone, Jeremy lifted his hands in a plating motion. "I only needed to see. I'm not here to cause trouble." Mark hesitated one final time because he didn't want to make things worse. However, he didn't have complete faith in Jeremy either. "You replied to me and claimed to understand." Jeremy's expression of regret. Jeremy stated in a shaky voice, "I know that Taylor is safe here. Let him be. Just trying to get my life together. I've been sober for 90 days. I'm in a program, and I'm seeing Taylor." Was all that sustained me. Taylor stood by Mark's side, now closely observing Jeremy with his customary mistrust of. As if sensing the truth in Jeremy's words, the man appeared to have softened. Mark sighed. "I'm not sure how to react, but I appreciate that you're attempting to make improvements, Jeremy. Taylor is under my care and is content here. Therefore, I'm not requesting his return." Mark scowled as Jeremy hurriedly replied, "I know I don't deserve that, but I wanted to apologize to him for abandoning him." Jeremy nodded in astonishment at the request. "But you think he'll comprehend an apology?" "I simply must remark that Mark debated forever." Taylor appeared composed, and Jeremy's presence showed that he is more forgiving than people. Although unexpected, it didn't feel dangerous, so he opened the gate a little while maintaining a tight hold on Taylor's leash. Jeremy moved cautiously as though he was worried of frightening the dog. "Hey Taylor," Jeremy said. His voice broke with sorrow as he kneeled lightly a few feet away and said, "I'm sorry, buddy. I should never have left you like that. You were more deserving than I was." Taylor cocked his head and looked at Jeremy carefully, and then, much to Mark's surprise, Taylor moved forward and nudged Jeremy's hand with his. It was a simple but deep sign of acceptance, and tears fell down the nose. As he softly caressed Taylor's fur, Jeremy's expression said, "Thank you." Mark witnessed the brief but impactful moment, feeling a range of feelings, including relief, sympathy, and an almost inaudible voice. Jeremy stood wiping after a few minutes, his protectiveness for Taylor unwavering. His voice became more steady as he said, "Thank you, Mark, for everything." As Jeremy departed, Mark nodded and ushered Taylor back inside. The exchange stayed in Mark's memory long after the sun had set, leaving him with more queries than responses. The week after, Mark, you need to see Sarah, the shelter volunteer, who called you unexpectedly. This is urgent," she added, handing him a link to a local news story with the headline, "Former Doggo Turns." The piece, which advocated for rescue animals, told the narrative of Jeremy's experiences volunteering at a local shelter. As a warning about negligence and second chances, Losing Taylor featured a picture of Jeremy with a rescue dog in his hands, showing a resolute yet modest Mark experienced a wave of pride mixed with shock that Jeremy had changed his life so abruptly. But that night, it appeared that Taylor's influence had spread well beyond their small house. Mark considered how their journey had changed as he sat on the couch with Taylor curled up next to him. What started out as a rescue effort turned into something much more significant, demonstrating the ripple effects of. Mark was given another surprise the following morning when a letter appeared in the mail. demonstrating kindness and the ability to change. Taylor was invited to speak at a national animal welfare convention, this time from the shelter inside. The conference organizers wanted the featured guests to share their tale with a wider audience since they were inspired by it. As he read the letter to the crowd, Mark grinned and scratched Taylor behind the ears. He replied, "Looks like we have more work to do." And Taylor waved his tail while his eyes gleamed with a mix of the request. Together, they had already undergone a great deal of change, and their journey was far from done. Mark sat in. It seemed strange to be asked, and the invitation to the National Animal Welfare Conference was open on his desk at home. Taylor, his devoted friend, sat at Mark's feet to tell their story to a group of advocates and experts. Buddy Mark muttered, reaching down to scratch, "I guess we're making waves, huh?" as he occasionally nudged his leg for attention. The dog responded by waving his tail behind Taylor's ears, which was a sweet reminder of their relationship. But in the middle of Mark was excited, but he was also apprehensive because telling their tale meant going over difficult times again. Not just four. His phone chimed, but so did Taylor's. It was Sarah, a shelter worker who had been instrumental in their journey, replied. "Hey Mark," her voice full of excitement. "Have you made up your mind yet? The conference is in a month, and I'm still considering it," Mark acknowledged. "The meeting. I'm not sure whether we're prepared for something like that." But Sarah's tone softened Mark, "You and Taylor. It's a large stage. Have already motivated a great number of people. Now is the opportunity to increase that influence. Consider all the animals and their owners." Mark sighed and looked at Taylor, who was lying on the rug, looking at someone who would find value in hearing your story. Completely satisfied, "I'll think about it," he said, cutting the call short. Mark debated his choice for the next few days. On the one hand, he wanted to respect Taylor's journey and the changes it brought about, ignited not only in their own lives, but also in Jeremy's and innumerable others. He was concerned about making their personal hardships public, and the internal argument reached a tipping point. Taylor had gained some local notoriety during one of their strolls, and it wasn't uncommon for people to pause and inquire about him. But one day a small child and his mother came along. The youngster was holding a leash on a Timid. The child inquired, his eyes full with amazement, "Is this Taylor, this nervous-looking puppy?" "It certainly is," Mark grinned. "And who is this young child?" The lad squatted down softly. "We recently adopted this friend from the shelter, and my mother decided we could because we had read about Taylor in." Mark's heart grew as he saw the paper, and he knelt to shake the boy's hand, "Which is amazing. The light of hope." The child smiled and said, "I'm sure Buddy's going to have an amazing life with you." As they left, Mark realized the extent of Taylor's impact. That night, their narrative served as a beacon of hope for others, not just for them. After typing his acceptance email to the conference organizers on his laptop, Mark pushed the send button, feeling both anxious anticipation and relief. "Well, Taylor," he replied, glancing. Mark worked diligently on this as the conference date drew near, and the dog snuggled up next to him. He pored over Taylor's journey pictures and videos throughout their presentation, from the first day at the gas station to there. He also contacted Jeremy, who had kept up his charity work and was now raising his first child, among many other milestones. Jeremy, the rescue dog, was thrilled to learn about the conference. "Mark and Taylor, you're going to be fantastic. Steal the show," Mark said, laughing. "I hope he doesn't get stage fright that day." The conference space was a hive of activity, with advocates, veterinarians, and Mark waited backstage as animal lovers flocked to the theater to hear tales of resiliency and change. "Deep breaths," Sarah whispered, putting a comforting hand on his chest as he felt the weight of the moment bearing down on him. Mark's speech. Mark nodded, looking at Taylor, who has something on your shoulder, appeared unaffected by the busy surroundings, and his serene manner served as a silent reminder of why they were there when it was their turn. The audience erupted into cheers as Mark and Taylor took the stage. The showman waggled his tail and even barked once, eliciting applause and cheers, and Mark started. In his address, he candidly described their journey, including the difficulties they encountered in the day he met Taylor, and those who had provided assistance during his journey. As he recounted Taylor's journey from a terrified and abandoned dog to a self-assured and cherished friend, He could see some people's eyes well up with tears. Taylor showed me that second chances are powerful, according to the audience members, Mark said, his unwavering voice, not only for animals but also for humans, demonstrated to me that love and resiliency can triumph despite even. The lecture concluded with a standing ovation under the most dire circumstances. Mark looked down at Taylor, who appeared to understand the importance of the occasion as they left the stage, and a number of guests came forward to offer their own tales of redemption and rescue, each of which emphasized the significance of their message that night as Mark and Taylor. The conference had gone well, but more significantly, they sat together on the porch as the sun sank. It had strengthened their mission. They were not merely narrating a tale. They were leaving a legacy, according to Taylor Mark. Taylor wagged his tail in an expression of thanks, saying, "You've changed my life, and I think you're just getting started." His eyes shone with confidence and satisfaction. Together, they had managed to transform a depressing time into a. The following morning, lifetime of hope. Taylor's nose gently brushing Mark's as he woke up the morning following the conference. As the sun shone through the blinds, it filled the room with a cozy warmth that seemed to be the start of. As Mark stretched, he discovered something new, a pile of emails on his phone. Emails from conference participants thanking each other for sharing their experiences. However, caught his attention. It was an invitation from a major animal welfare group for Mark and Taylor to work together on a campaign encouraging rescue adoptions. They intended to highlight Taylor as a representation of tenacity and second chances. Mark and Taylor were sitting on the porch that day when he thought about the email. It was exciting to think about reaching a wider audience. That exciting, but there were drawbacks as well. Accepting would require traveling and committing to a public life, something neither Mark nor Taylor had ever imagined. Yet the idea of his choice was made despite his reluctance to help more animals find loving homes. Confirmed when Jeremy called Mark, and I wanted to express my gratitude once more after. I've made the decision to adopt the puppy I was fostering after seeing you and Taylor at the conference. I can't imagine my life without it. Mark's heart grew without him, which is incredible, Jeremy. I'm proud of you, Taylor. Motivated me. As Mark hung up, Jeremy acknowledged that I understood that giving up on him would have been equivalent to giving up on myself. He glanced at Taylor, who was sprawled out on the porch, and asked, "What do you think, boy? Should we try this?" As if to confirm, Taylor drummed his tail on the wood floor. Mark then emailed the company and started. Over the next few weeks, while they planned their next move, their narrative acquired popularity on social media and in local. People from different walks of life contacted news sources to express how Taylor's journey had impacted them. Some talked about. Others who had been rescued and adopted acknowledged that it had motivated them to act. And Taylor came to represent hope, and Mark discovered himself thrown into an advocacy realm he had not expected, and their days turned into a blur of photo shoots and interviews. Shots and neighborhood gatherings. Taylor effortlessly modified his composed manner. The pivotal moment for Mark occurred when he visited a crowded shelter in a nearby town as a grounding force. When Mark visited the facility, he was astounded by how many animals were in need. Karen, the shelter director, outlined the difficulties they encountered, including a shortage of adoptions, overcrowding, and inadequate money. Mark couldn't get the picture of the dogs, their eyes full of desire, gazing out from behind the bars that night. He sat down with Karen to talk about how he and Taylor might assist. Together, they came up with a plan that would not only generate money, but also urge people to support and embrace the initiative that was introduced a month later with Taylor as its focal point. Billboards and internet advertisements told his tale and encouraged people to give it another opportunity. The shelter had an increase in adoptions and donations from all over the world in a matter of weeks due to the enormous response. One afternoon, Country Karen sobbed as she called Mark to tell him that you and Taylor had saved so many lives. "I am very grateful that Mark's life changed in ways he never would have thought possible, and he now finds himself in meetings and on stages." Taylor supported him throughout the entire process of promoting laws that would save animals and aid shelters. His quiet strength served as a continual reminder of the reason behind their efforts, which resulted in the construction of Mark gave it the name of an organization that supports rescue shelters and encourages good pet ownership. The legacy of Taylor. One evening, as they sat by the dog that had transformed his life and the lives of innumerable others, Taylor's legacy paid homage to the fireplace. Mark looked at the framed picture of his very first photograph on the mantel and thought about how far they had come. Of Taylor at the petrol station, filthy and terrified, stood in sharp contrast to the "You come a long way, friend Mark." The dog is now cuddled up at his feet, bright and healthy, remarked in a passionate voice, and I have since lifted Taylor's head too. As if he understood every word, soulful eyes met Mark's. And although their journey was far from complete, Mark knew together, they were on the correct track, transforming a period of abandonment into a movement of hope. And as the night became darker, Mark experienced a deep sense of calm. Taylor wasn't simply a dog. He was proof that Taylor's recuperation at the shelter proceeded over the next few days, but the transformational power of love and perseverance. He developed a strong bond with Mark, but his emotional scars were still visible because of the dog's reluctance to interact with strangers. Countless details of the ordeal he had gone through one fateful afternoon as Mark came back. Karen hurried toward him, her face pallid, as the shelter exploded in turmoil from a supply run. She cried out, gasping for air, worried that Mark Taylor was gone. The flight. When a truck surprised him, he ran through the back gate. Mark felt a wave of panic and reached for his keys, which Mark ran without hesitation after Karen guided him in the direction of the open fields that border the highway. The countryside stretched on forever as Mark drove his eyes to his truck, adrenaline pulsing through his blood. He yelled out Taylor's name several times while looking around him, his voice breaking in despair. Hours went by as the sun sank lower in the sky, illuminating the fields with crimson and gold hues. Mark was overcome with tiredness, but he was determined not to give up, and as he came to a narrow dirt path, he noticed a flash of movement. With his heart thumping in his chest, he hit the brakes and leaped out of the truck close to an abandoned barn. In the dim light of the barn, Taylor was seen crouched in a corner, his eyes shaking. Became wide with recognition as Mark got closer, but the dog remained motionless. Mark saw that Taylor's paw had a large cut. "I'm fine, friend," Taylor Mark said while kneeling a few steps away, probably from a sharp metal object during his escape. Taylor sobbed quietly, caught between his want to run away and his have faith in Mark. Gradually, Mark took a piece of jerky out of his pocket and offered it as a peace sacrifice. "Taylor, it's just the two of us. Come on, boy. Let's get home after what seemed like for all eternity." Mark remained motionless while Taylor cautiously moved forward. After letting the dog get closer, Taylor finally buried his head in Mark's chest and sighed deeply. Mark's eyes welled up with tears as he put his arm around Taylor. "Miz, are you scared of me?" he whispered. Emotionally charged, Mark gently carried Taylor into the truck and drove back to the shelter, saying, "Let me get you out of here." When they got there, the crew cheered them on, but Mark's attention was only on. Taylor brought the dog into the medical wing, where a veterinarian and Karen attended to his needs right away. He would recover from his bodily injuries, the veterinarian promised, but it's obvious he still bears numerous emotional wounds. Mark nodded, his mouth clenched in resolve. That evening, as Mark sat by Taylor's side, he considered how far they had come and said, "I'll do whatever it takes to help him heal." When he came to understand that their relationship was about more than simply friendship, it was about redemption for both of them. Taylor had given Mark a mission and demonstrated to Taylor that fear could be replaced by love. But their tale wasn't finished yet. When Mark arrived at the shelter's main office the following morning, he discovered Karen clutching She handed him the stack of adoption forms, saying, "These are for Taylor." Paper since his story was made public. He has somewhat become a local celebrity. The idea of Taylor abandoning him made Mark's stomach turn. But he also understood that the shelter's mission was, "You should search through them to locate each animal a permanent home," Karen said. That evening, Mark sat in his tiny apartment with the application spread out in front of him, gently saying, "It's your decision." One depicted a caring home, but as he read it, none of them felt correct. As if sensing his distress, Taylor pushed his leg with his nose during the last application, and Mark placed the papers down. Taylor threw aside his tail and gazed into his eyes. "What do you think, buddy? Do you want to stay with me?" Put his head on Mark's lap and gave a clear response at that very moment. Karen arched an eyebrow when Mark brought the applications back to the shelter the following day after making his selection. Mark firmly stated, "Taylor isn't just a dog, and I can't let him go." Karen, his family, grinned at me, her eyes gleaming with comprehension. "I suspected you would say congratulations." Since the adoption documents were signed that afternoon, Mark Taylor is now formally yours, securing their relationship for all time. Mark muttered, "Welcome home, buddy," as he clipped Taylor's new collar into place. For the first time, Taylor gave a happy. Everyone in the shelter smiled as they heard the loud barking. It seemed as though Taylor knew Mark plunged himself into his work at the shelter with Taylor at his side when he had finally found his forever home. They became into rescue animal champions, visiting schools and neighborhood gatherings to tell their tale of Taylor's change from a stray dog to a representation of hope led to innumerable adoptions and contributions, guaranteeing. Although their journey was far from over, Mark and Taylor were convinced that no animal would be abandoned. They would continue to transform lives together after saving one another. And now that everyone was cheering and loving Taylor, she had grown beyond a dog. He was a living example of the strength of compassion, tenacity, and the enduring connection between people and animals as life progressed. Mark, the once apprehensive dog, found a new normal with Taylor. He was left at a gas station and developed into a lively and loving friend, with a golden coat that shone in his tail was wagging like a banner of triumph as he rushed through the park in the sunlight. Once silent and desolate, Mark's tiny flat became lively with Taylor's. Every morning, Taylor would nudge Mark awake in anticipation of their daily escapades, and every evening would conclude with. They watched old movies together while cuddled up on the couch, with Taylor's head resting on Mark's lap. As word of Taylor's amazing journey spread, local news organizations and animal welfare became interested. At gatherings where Taylor frequently stole the show with his cool demeanor, Mark was asked to relate their tale. Kindness and wagging tail one day at a shelter community fundraiser. With wide eyes, the young girl came up to Taylor and questioned, "Is he the dog from the story?" in a voice that was just audible above a whisper. "That's correct. This is Taylor." The female is crouching down and putting her arms around Taylor's. She said, "He's so brave," with tears in her eyes, "just like you." Adoptions at the shelter increased dramatically as a result of Taylor's tale. Families who had previously been hesitant to adopt now saw every animal's potential. The shelter's kennel started to fill up, and contributions came flooding in, allowing them to increase their services and save more needy animals. Karen, who had always had faith in Taylor's fortitude, proudly observed as the shelter developed into a center of hope, and she observed to Mark one afternoon as they loaded up, "It's incredible how one dog can make such a difference." Materials for a fresh rescue mission. Mark nodded, watching Taylor play with some kids nearby. He acknowledged that he altered my life, and that he is also improving the lives of many others. Even though everything seemed so positive, Mark couldn't help but remember Tack's suffering. As Taylor curled up next to him on a wet evening, Mark couldn't help but think of the family who had abandoned Taylor. He pondered whether they ever felt remorse for what they had done, or whether they were even aware of their incredible dog. Abandoned Mark made the decision to transform his residual melancholy into something worthwhile and started Project, dubbed Second Chances, a program designed to teach individuals about the importance of proper pet ownership. And the program immediately became popular with the school community, emphasizing the value of second chances for both humans and animals. Centers and even nearby companies holding events. Taylor became the project spokesperson, telling his experiences at one such occasion, a potent reminder that every life deserves love and care. A man with tears in his eyes came up to Mark and said, "Your story reminded me of a mistake I made years ago. I've regretted giving up a puppy I couldn't care for, but seeing Taylor gives me hope that perhaps." Mark put a comforting hand on the man's shoulder. "After my dog found someone as nice as you. We are powerless to alter the past," he said. Taylor's fame kept growing, but to Mark, he was simply his puppy, but we can improve things for the future. Devoted, silly, and affectionate life partner. Their relationship was unbreakable and based on trust. One lovely afternoon, they sat together and enjoyed forgiveness and the simple pleasure of being together. Mark turned to face Taylor as they watched the ducks paddle along the lake. "You know, buddy, you didn't just get. You gave me a second chance, and I did too." Taylor glanced up at Mark, waving his tail as though to convey that, in the end, he knew. Taylor's journey involved more than simply surviving. It also involved his transition from a stray puppy at a petrol station. As Mark watched, Taylor represented the strength of unconditional love and the tenacity of the spirit, serving as a sign of hope. With Taylor at his side, he experienced a deep sensation of thankfulness over the ocean. For each and every cry, each restless night, and each and every doubt that existed, have a tremendous sense of fulfillment and happiness. Taylor and Mark's story demonstrates the amazing connection between. If this tale touched you, think about letting a needy animal into your heart. Together, we can. Remember to like this video, share with your friends, and subscribe to our channel to help us create more happy endings like Taylor. For more touching tales, subscribe to our channel. Let's share the message of love, hope, and second chances, since every life deserves an opportunity to shine.